Hi again then guys, and welcome to another stroll back down memory lane to Gran Turismo 2 yet again. As I've said before, one of my favourite games in the entire franchise, and this is a car which a lot of people have asked me to review, to do videos for in general, and it's one of those fan favourite unicorns from the game that it's very understandable why people would want it back. I mean, of course you would. Why wouldn't you want it back? Because of course this car, along with another HKS Nissan, the 180SX, are, I believe if I recall correctly, the two only drag cars, not just of Gran Turismo 2, but technically of the whole franchise. Now, of course, Gran Turismo as an entire franchise is not known for official drag racing. Now, the community does plenty of it, especially from GT5 onwards, culminating especially on Gran Turismo 6. There were always tons of drag lobbies, but why would you have an official drag car, or cars in this case, when you don't actually have official drag events or even a drag track? Well, apparently it was supposed to. Gran Turismo 2 was intended to actually have drag racing, but due to time, due to production, scheduling, they weren't able to actually include it, and I guess it's just one of those things that, much like my beloved Espace F1, got left behind when they moved over, of course, to the new console with GT3. So with that in mind, that puts this one and also the S chassis drag car in a very precarious position within Gran Turismo 2, because on paper drag cars sound fantastic. They've got incredible numbers, great power, great acceleration, but they're very much so designed for that one specific purpose. They're just designed to go fast in a straight line, literally. So without drag racing in the game, how good could it really be? Well, for those of you who have never played the game, don't worry, it's really good, because the car feels entirely justified in being kept in the game, and I'm glad that they did, because sometimes we learn later on that there were certain cars that were left out of certain versions of the game, like the Formula cars in GT3, or the way that the Team Orica Audi R8 LMP car was very clearly based on PS2 graphics, in Gran Turismo 6 for instance, but was never actually on the PS2, or for instance how the Nomad Diablo was left out of certain versions of Gran Turismo 3, etc, etc. So I'm really glad that they decided to keep this one in. Now, what do you actually get from the car? Because the two of them are different. Well, you get all-wheel drive, which is a pretty good start. It's one of the founding points of what makes a GTR so good to begin with, so to still have that in a drag car is not only rare, but it's cool. Now, in terms of the engine, that's of course really what you want to know about. Well, it still has a 2.6 litre turbo aspirated unit, just like a normal Skyline, but unlike a normal Skyline, it's putting out 1011 horsepower and 676 pound-feet of torque. So not quite as much torque as you might expect, but the power more than makes up for it. Plus, the weight is much lower than a normal Skyline would be, at 1280 kilos. So, if I recall correctly, it's not quite as lightweight as the 180 drag car, but still, it's not exactly heavy. And consequently, when you combine that decent weight with one of the highest power outputs in the entire game, in fact, the horsepower per tonne is fantastic. 790 horsepower per metric tonne is again enough to put this car in probably the top 5, I should think, definitely the top 10 highest horsepower per tonne outputs of the entire game. But what then in terms of how it actually performs? Especially around corners, that's the part that you're probably wondering about. Well, I'm glad to be able to say it's actually a surprisingly good cornering machine, which, for all intents and purposes, it shouldn't be. It should not be a good cornering machine at all, because it's a drag car by definition, but it's occasions like this where you see the very clear bias, of course, that Gran Turismo has towards Nissans, the GTR in particular. This car shouldn't stand a chance against anything around a track, and yet it does. It's actually a pretty decent handling car. Now, the top end speed in particular is what makes it a dominant force, so you really want to use it on tracks where you can make full use of that, like Super Speedway or the high speed ring for instance, but also tracks where you actually do have some corners can make for a good place to show off what the car can do. For instance, like a Grand Valley. Because Grand Valley of course has a ton of corners, a ton of hairpins, but also a really long home straight where you can really open up this car. So overall, although you can't buy it, you actually win it for doing the Turbo Cup, and you only get a 30% chance of winning the car. 1 out of 3 tries will necessarily win it. Of course you could win it every time, but I happened to win it, thankfully, but if you don't, just do the championship again and you've got a chance of winning it that time. Either way, it's definitely worth trying to pick up. If I recall correctly, it's not too difficult a championship to win, as long as you have the right car, of course, and I would say it's actually worth the payoff. This is one of the most unique unicorns alongside its 180SX sibling of the entire franchise. And for me, it's easily up there with stuff like the Spas F1 and the Jay Leno tank car in terms of being these really off-the-wall, oddball, unexpected choices, but at the same time ones which really do find a place within the franchise. Some of those even go on to become icons of the franchise, stuff like the Escudo or the Chaparral 2J. They're absolutely insane, but they're really, really useful. Unfortunately, that wasn't carried over for this car or the 180SX drag car, but at least in Gran Turismo 2, you do have the opportunity to go back and experience the only official drag cars of the entire series. And that is pretty cool, and it pretty much solidifies this car's importance as far as Gran Turismo unicorn cars go. But that's it for this pick, of course. I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.